Hi there. I'm Ben Cope from Intel. I'm a technologist in our group looking at the professional AV market. And today I'm going to tell you about the work I've been doing with many other colleagues. You'll see the companies here in the IPMX CODEC activity group at the Video Services Forum. I co-chair this group with Andre from Matrox, and also Andrew, who's here today, has been it was very instrumental in starting this activity. So yeah, thank you all for joining. So, oops, I'll find the way I'm going to advance this. So the first thing I'm going to do is, on that first slide, there was lots of different logos. So the first thing to do here is just to explain where the different groups are playing. So firstly, we're hosted here kindly on the AIMS booth. AIMS is the marketing and product management side of the initiative. The VSF, the Video Services Forum, that's really where the engineering work's been done on the technical readiness documents. So that will create the specifications for the transport, media plane, etc. The related VSF activity groups to IPMX is sort of a core IPMX activity group where a lot of those TR documents have been created. And then secondly, the group that I'm co-chairing with Andre, which is this review of the codec options for AV over IP protocols in Pro AV. And there's also a sort of AMWA looking after the control plane aspects. So hopefully this gives a perspective of where the different parties are involved. What I would say as introduction to the group, this codec group, is what we observed was there was a lot of discussions on the role of different codecs. Codecs like JPXS, we have our two colleagues here from Interpix, it was sort of very well known and the use cases that played. But we wanted to have a forum where we could have a conversation about the different use cases that are out there, really capture the breadth of Pro AV use cases, and have a discussion on, for example, where you may use a VBR codec, a variable bitrate codec, as well as a constant bitrate codec. And maybe also uncompressed is an option as well in different scenarios. So really somewhere that we could openly discuss those and make some recommendations, not on a winning codec, as you'll see, but on how you would assess and look at different codecs. So that's kind of some of the spirit of what we're trying to achieve, and you'll see more as I go through. So firstly, in motivation, so what makes me as a technologist excited to get involved in this activity? So this is what what I see going on in the market. First off is we see the shift from AV to IT. This is a macro industry shift. I think you're walking around the trade show here, you'll observe this, that when I started coming maybe 10, 12 years ago, there was a lot of custom AV products, right? It's made of custom hardware. Now, if you're looking at your conferencing solution, for example, with Teams rooms, these are running on standard, generally Intel-based PCs, right? So you've had this shift from very custom hardware products where you set dip switches to things that look more like a traditional IT product. Some of that has been accelerated by recent supply chain challenges in the last few years. If you're using standard PC hardware, it's easy to swap between suppliers if one can't supply. The other aspect, which is really an enabler for this, is AV over IP. So what we've seen in many markets, and you'll see the symbols here. So we'll give the comparison to the telco market and the broadcast studio market, which a number of the players here also work in, is we've seen this shift from those sort of domain-specific protocols to Ethernet. And there's fewer technologies out there that have been around as long as Ethernet, and Ethernet, generally has been pervasive. So we see this transition across many markets, and I think what's happening in Pro AV is mirroring what's happened in the telco market and the studio market, which in turn has enabled that shift to IT. So that's a couple of trends I wanted to point out. And what's really important that I always emphasize is underlying all this sustainability and manageability are really key things. So we leverage, from our company's perspective, our partners running on standard PC hardware. You can leverage all the good things we do for sustainability and manageability in the IT space into Pro AV. So a second bit of motivation for the group. This is the work that's going on in AIMS to look at the different IPMX profiles. Intel ourselves are not AIMS members, but we work with our peers in VSF who work on this. And I think the key thing I wanted to point out here, without getting into the detail on the specific profiles and the profile work, is the purple box at the bottom, where you see the comparison of different options from, yes, uncompressed has a role, right through to the long GOP, high bit rate, variable bit rates, high compression, say, variable bit rate codecs, and then others, the intraframe mezzanine and interframe mezzanine codec options in the middle. And really, as I said, what we're trying to do in this group is to make sense of this and provide some tools and some guidance on how you would compare and look at the comparison problem. So this just states more formally some of the goals of the codec activity group. Who said there's many codecs available out there, and we want to provide guidance on what are the use cases, what are the criteria by which you compare, what might a test plan be, so how you could formulaically go through comparison, and then importantly, publish our results so that we can share it with others. And we hope, as well as to help AIMS activities, we also hope it could help the industry at large sort of grow that pie of AV over IP and be valuable to anyone working in the AV over IP space. What it is not is we're not trying to select a winning codec, right? We're not here to champion one versus another. We're not a test group, so we don't want to get bogged down in doing lots of codec testing. We don't want to discuss the costs in this forum, and also we're not looking to develop new technology, I say. And underlying this, when we look at things like test vectors and things, we want to maximize the amount of reuse that we do. So who's involved? This is the logos of all the participants in our activity group. So we very much, for anyone listening back to this, welcome anyone who wants to be new members to come and work with us, and I'm sure the VSF would welcome them as members into that. But yeah, thank you really to all these people who helped put the work together. So this was the roadmap that we published at the outset. So what we've done so far is summarize the top use cases and comparison metrics. We've actually fed those back into a online resource from the Joint Task Force on Network Media, where they published originating use cases, which sort of turned into the IPMX initiative or justified that. We've published some more back of areas that we found certain use cases weren't represented that are really important to look at when you're thinking about codecs. We then planned this codec landscape report, which is what we've been working on, and I'm happy to say the first draft of this is available. And incorporated within that and work we're continuing to do as the closing documents is looking at vendor self-test plans and sort of a way of comparison. And we're actually going through that with some vendors now. I'll show a snapshot of what we mean by that later on. And we're hoping to wrap up this activity in Q1. We wanted this to be a finite time exercise, get some feedback, but of course we can regroup if more work needs to be done in the future. So yeah, this talks about the sort of codec work in IPMX from the TRs, from the specification document perspective. Right? So I think the important thing to note here is all that's done in these technical recommendations is to specify how you would transport a constant bit rate or variable bit rate codec. We're not specifying a particular codec. That would happen in that profile activity, which I mentioned at AIMS before. So I mentioned the use cases. So this is maybe a bit of an eye chart, although we're sat quite close, so we probably can read it, even myself without my glasses. But what I think important here, everything in blue was new common themes that we added. So the way that JTNM user requirement GitHub document was structured was really around common themes. And what we've done is list out a lead use case so it makes it more tangible. So it's actually, you can probably better visualize a control room than you could, what does excellent video quality at 1 gig mean? So we wanted to really just give an example of where these would be used. But then we spotted some things like Wi-Fi transport. That's kind of an interesting consideration from a compression perspective because you probably need to go to lower bitrate for that. So also that sort of retrofit install with PTZ cameras or displays which already have H.264 or 265 codec support. So again, another one that came up and some more examples down there. And a key thing is in output from the group, we've contributed all this back to that original document as a pull request, and that's been accepted so that hopefully we've enhanced that sort of body of knowledge on the key Pro AV use cases, but really with respect to determining what would help select a codec. So this is just a visual on the use cases. Won't dwell too much on this, but I think the thing I wanted to show here is really that the use cases represent those different categories I talked about. So we kind of split into 3 buckets of mezzanine iframe only, mezzanine interframe, and high compression. And okay, you could argue maybe one could be in multiple different buckets here, but you see on the right-hand side with high compression, you have your fitting in with a existing H.264, 265 ecosystem, maybe Wi-Fi connectivity, and then in the middle looking at maybe mezzanine, looking at maybe medical applications or getting really good desktop content, through to left-hand side maybe control, maybe some video wall control room applications. And we actually published a white paper as Intel. Some of my colleagues published one on low latency lossless compression options. And they did that with one of our healthcare partners and customers. And that one really looked at comparing different options. So it's kind of interesting read. So what are the decision factors? So, I won't go through and read all these line by line, but what we did was this was really about collecting the tribal knowledge of the group, because there's a lot of, as you saw with the parties before, a lot of experience in there. And we just wanted to document what are the common decision factors people would look at when comparing a codec. So we went through this exercise that way. And then this sort of completes the list. So you see here, the first page had the common ones like the resolutions and that sort of thing. But also it's important to know not so much the transport, but how is the, in terms of bitrate control, is the codec, appropriate and susceptible to that? And then hardware IP complexity. A lot of the AV devices out there are based off FPGAs, for example, and their hardware point. How complex is this? And also from a software complexity point of view as well, there's this trend I mentioned before on the move to IT. So we want to make sure when looking at it, we're kind of assessing the software complexity. And of course, one of the nuances there is that a lot of processors will harden those high order codecs, right? The AVCs, HTVCs will have a hardened codec engine. So actually that can make it less complex, even though if you ran it as a software application, those things can be quite heavyweight. So that's a consideration there. Yeah, and then some other factors that we're looking at were availability. So it's all very good having the sort of best codec option out there, but is it available? Can people access it? Is there a core to license, etc.? Error resilience is obviously very important, particularly working over networks. Errors can happen. And multi-resolution support. We actually discussed some interesting use cases where but you might want to transmit more than one stream. So you might want to transmit a proxy that someone could look at before receiving the full stream. So is there certain aspects of a codec that support that better or not? Yeah. So sorry, the animation. Oops, I didn't realize I had line by line animation on that. So sorry. So the I mentioned on the first page that we sort of separated into categories, and we found it kind of a bit tricky at first to say what are the high level topics, but this is where we landed. So we said you have those high compression codecs. So the usual suspects up there, you have AVC, HEVC, obviously VVC as the next generation, and then also the VP9 and AV1 for completeness. And we then have the mezzanine iframe, and you can see the list of the options we look at there, and then the interframe options at the bottom there. And then we also recognize that there's other codecs out there that are maybe proprietary in some way that we don't document. So the next bit of next sort of part of the activity is the development of test sequences. So this is actually a work of credit to Elaine, mostly from Matrox. But what we've sort of done here is to, based on those use cases, put together a portfolio of test cases or sequences which would represent those use cases. So again, the essence here was maximizing reuse. So we referred to test cases that came out of AV1, for example, that are publicly available there, and referred to those. So we're not reinventing the wheel, but also identifying that maybe those don't include a desktop content case. So added to those and sort of working on making those available as a resource, such that your codec vendors could use those or others in sort of a self-testing initiative. This I don't expect you to read, but this is really just to show what is one of the work in process activities. So based on those use cases and common themes, and really we determined you kind of need to assess those against a certain resolution. And then all the metrics that I showed before sort of put together this table. And now we're working through codec by codec in a subset, but the probably most frequently discussed of what I mentioned before, to populate this so that we can have just have a conversation around the fit of a particular codec to the use cases. And kind of one thing I expect might come out of this is you have some sort of color coding on here, so that you can get a very quick view to say, yeah, that codec, it's all green over this part of the table, so it's really good fit for those sort of use cases. This other one, there may be some pros and cons to consider. So this is sort of more of a formulaic way to do that comparison. So key takeaways of the work that we've done so far. So firstly, as I said right at the start, from a use case perspective, we've updated that JTNM use case GitHub with some new thinking to really represent that breadth of codec requirement. We've created and actually getting some early testing and feedback on this set of test sequences to cover the use cases, reusing existing content as much as possible, such as from the AV1 work, and then generating new content and contributing new content there to fill the gap. We've collated that tribal knowledge on the decision criteria that are important, and really taking a structured approach to the comparison, and again, I think a lot of what we've contributed here is not so much in a comparison result, but the processes and the tools by which someone can compare, because comparison is, even if you put down quantitative measures, it still has subjective elements and people interpret differently. So I think it's a nice balance in sort of publishing the ways we go about it rather than the result per se. And then we have this draft ecosystem landscape report, including the above, which is ready for review. and the co-chairs, myself and Andre, can be contacted if someone wants access to those. So I know Andre is here in his name. So thank you for your attention. Yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, our contact is on here, and happy if anyone has any questions.